welcome to the show. This week I'm so very excited to have Mackenzie Eason on with me. Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Paula. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah.
And just to have an hour to chat with you. Just like yay. I'm really excited.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that I like to ask everybody is what did what brought you joy as a child, and what were your earliest sparks of joy?
Ooh, as a child. Um okay, I'm just gonna trust whatever came up here. Okay. What first came to mind is I loved being outside and hanging with my homies in the neighborhood, but I strangely loved like peeing outside. Like I loved just like sneaking out of my house with like a little teepee and peeing outside. And it brought me so much joy. And I would get caught. Like my dad would, see me like sneaking outside with some TP and be like, "What are you doing?" But that's just what popped in my mind. Like I got so much joy being outside and being
That's
outside.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's a podcast first too. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That brings back stuff for me as well. Like, not me personally so much, but I was a camp counselor for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, because we would sleep out overnight under the stars and have to dig a latrine, and leading 8 little girls outside for the night was always funny
And
too.
interesting. Yeah.
But, then there was always something that happened with the toilet paper, and like
Oh yeah.
the hill into the poison ivy. Like there was it was always hilarity, really.
For sure, it's an adventure. It's
So yeah, so that's
yeah.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna trust that's what came up. So
I'm gonna stop giggling. So yeah, then the segue is.
Yeah, where to go from there?
I'm sorry, you got me real good with that one. I needed it. Yeah. So and of course, for listeners, Mackenzie and I know each other from back at coaching. We have a coaching background together, and we're part of the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program. Highly recommended.
Yes.
If you're looking for that. And now you work with people who are going through breakups and learning to love themselves. And I thought it'd be just a real treat to have you on to talk about that kind of during this Valentine season, because I know so many of us, Valentine's Day has all this pressure around it, and love is always hard. so
exactly.
But like it's always such a quagmire of things that it's a really difficult holiday. So I would love to kind of talk about maybe some of your own journey, and also how do you help people who are going through the difficulties of a kind of a fraught day.
Yeah. I love that you're highlighting that, because it is Valentine's Day. There's all this pressure and expectation and emphasis on couples. And I mean, especially with social media, it can be a day where you're just like confronted with these images of couples and love, and it can create such a very strange experience if you're not in a relationship. And often when you're in a relationship, or if there's challenges in it, it's just it's a tricky one. In relationships in general, it's the landscape of the heart and connection is nuanced and a wild frontier of sorts. And most of us are given often grow up with like the opposite of a manual, and modeled relationships in different ways that, some healthy, some unhealthy. And I've really, over the years in my own journey, started to feel where relationships, and if you show up for it well, and including breakups and challenges, can be a really powerful vehicle for growth and healing and transformation that is unique. And the part I love about it is that it's very I guess embodied is the word. Like it's hard to really bypass or ignore stuff that's coming up in your relationship, including the relationship with yourself. It's such an interesting, it's a whole frontier. Yeah.
So how do we become people who are ready for maybe a healthy relationship? Like the relationship piece of it means you got to know yourself really well. And so where are we falling down in that space?
Yeah. Good question. Big question. But it's I really love it. I mean, I think the big part is it is so much around the relationship we have with ourselves and our awareness of that. And in every relationship and every person has different challenges or things that really pull them astray. But I would say a lot of it is that foundation of a relationship with yourself. And I think where we get in a lot of tricky situations and challenge and hurt is like comes down to a place where we, like what I call our wholeness, where if we're in a more codependent thing, or we have a tendency to abandon ourselves or our own heart, or outsource our partner for our sense of authority or validation, or they're our sole care provider to take care of our emotions, or things like that, it creates a dynamic where it can feel unbalanced and scary. And I would say that that's the thing that's coming up the most, that creates the most challenge, is where we're not fully holding ourselves and having a really fulfilling, deep, loving relationship with ourselves, where we've got our own hearts, and yes, let's use our partners and like co-regulate with them and find delight and soothing and co-create, you know, your life together and share love. But it gets really wobbly when we plug into them to meet all of our needs, emotional, mean like the full spectrum.
Right. Yeah. And I can see where it is, there's a lot of messaging and modeling out there. I mean, even if so I love Disney and problematic, right? Because even the messaging as women that we receive from princesses is that someone else completes us, or that it's the destiny somehow ends with a marriage. And there's never really much of a story past what happens with those people.
Right, then the credits roll. Yeah.
Bells ringing, and then the kiss. And so I think some of it's like we don't know really what's after that, because there's not a lot of modeling for it. If someone is saying, I think we could run through a couple scenarios, even like, I really wish I could find the right person, but I don't know where to start. And it does feel like each of my relationships has been problematic, and I don't know why they fall apart or why I can't find the right person. Like, where does that person start?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple different places to start, and back to the Disney piece, and like there's such a storyline there of like cultural and how that impacts us. And I think that also leads to a space of feeling like if a relationship ends, that we're broken, and and the relationship was a failure, we're a failure, something's wrong with us. That whole narrative is really common. And so that's honestly I guess to answer your question, I think that's a powerful place to start, of number one, holding a lot of sweetness and gentleness with yourself, and holding your past relationships as a grounds of like learning and what was there, and really just starting to look at, okay, what did I learn there? What was my part? And then also getting really curious of, you know, relationships are 50-50. It's not all just one person. But it is important to look at and be curious about, like, especially if there's a pattern of how certain relationships keep going, starting to look at like, what's the root of this? Or where was this in me even before I connected with this person? And what's really mine to have ownership over? And what's not, and what's been the other people I've related to. I think that's a really powerful place to start. And then it really goes back to, I mean, again, it would be unique to each person and situation, but I think it's like, that's an entry point. And then starting to really look at like, okay, where can I fill my own cup with like a lot of love, and get out of that dynamic of searching for someone else to complete me, so that when I connect with someone, it's this more of a like overflowing sort of space. And that tends to, like, when we haven't looked at some of those things from our past and our patterns, or what emotional places were blocked, or what parts of our heart are just really asking for our attention. When we haven't connected with that in ourselves, it's easy to kind of, in an interesting way, the universe can work. It's like, oh, here's a person perfectly to help you play that out and extract it up. Mm-hmm. And you can, it depends how you meet it. If you meet it, it can be a healing thing, or you can just keep replaying. Yes. So when you start to really look inward and hold all those pieces for yourself, you'll start to magnetize and attract and relate to people who aren't so much being sent as like a representative to help you play something out, but you'll start, being drawn towards people who are a healthier match. And not that we're like, oh, now I'm perfectly healed now. It's not like a sense of trying to be unbroken, but there's a way in which we start to shift how we show up in relationships that are just healthier, and that create more space in a healthy healing container for stuff to come up, basically.
I really love, because as you were saying that, I was thinking there really is kind of that fine line between what is the work I'm doing for myself and internally doing, not on myself, but maybe that's the best English word for it. And then the piece of because of what I either believe about myself or how I feel about myself, who I'm truly attracting. And so I think there's an interesting thing there of like, when you look at a pattern of what's coming in, if you're the constant,
right, if you're the common denominator, it's just
it's a little, and so then the good news is looking at those patterns, you can probably see where is it that I could dig in and do a little work around this, or do I need to become more comfortable with this aspect, or am I asking somebody to fill a piece of what's missing for me when I'm the one that should be filling that or digging in or whatever it is. So there's a lot of really interesting territory there, and that's not part of the princess.
They don't really go. They don't process her.
There's
her
no
childhood.
There's just perfection.
Exactly.
Hashtag.
That would be nice though, if there was, like the fairy godmother comes in and does like a, a coaching therapy session with her. She's like, okay, this is what you need to like, work out a little bit.
I love it. It's so funny. And I know you work a lot with people who are going through breakups. If I recall, I think that the holiday season itself, kind of starting December through the end of like February, tends to be a time when a lot comes up, and sometimes you realize, well, this wasn't what I thought it was. So if somebody's in that space maybe right now, what do you have to share with them about their heart, and what do they need to know?
Right, it's the combination. For sure. And that's such a common thing. And I find like weddings can be like this for couples too. Going to a wedding can bring up all of that. And it really is like a pressure cooker is how I would describe it. I think the biggest thing is to really be aware of what you want to take on and what you don't, in terms of what relationships mean to you, and how do you define a healthy love life, and what does that look like for you? Because around the holidays and then the Valentine's Day, you're confronted with like your Aunt Susan talking about when are you getting married, or or maybe a Zoom meeting because of COVID with holidays, but like you're confronted a lot, you're like interfacing a lot with your family ties and some of their opinions and perspectives and values and relationships, and where that meets you, and then building up to the holidays. So I think the first place I would begin is really looking at your beliefs around relationships, what you make relationships mean, the symbolism, and starting to tease through like what that really truly means for you. And that can be different than even the partner you're with, but I think that's a powerful thing to keep in mind. And in terms of, questioning a relationship, I mean, I think if you can harness the holidays as a powerful time to really work with, if you've been in a space of questioning or having some challenges in your relationship, and it's been a little like an undercurrent or a little bit under the rug, like you can bet the holidays are going to bring it up.
Yeah.
And so if, you can do your best to like work on your communication and lean into it, like kind of trust that it's coming up, have those conversations with your partner. But I think it can be a powerful time for reflecting and processing emotions and getting really clear on, I call them like your relationship pillars. It's like, what are these core things that are essential? Like, I need to be met in this way. Not that my partner has to be perfect, but at least they're willing to work on things or like meet me in this foundational way. And if the type of things that like, if they're not present, it's not a healthy relationship for you, basically, or really not aligned with the life you want to create. Like a real simple one, it's different for each person, is, like having children. That would be a really big pillar. But for some, it's like, a certain level of communication, or it's really nuanced for each person. But it's like, what are these core things? And this is beyond just like, oh, I want my partner to like play golf and be 6'5" and, whatever. Like, I'm not talking like little traits, but these core things. And can be helpful to think about past relationships around like, wow, what was the breaking point? Like, what really didn't work? Where were the gaps? That can help inform you of like what's really, really important. And once you get clear on that for you, not your family's version of relationship or what's important, but like you,
right,
sift through, tease through what's trash, like what you don't want to take on. And then from there, being clear with yourself and what's there, and having those like conversations. And there's so many pieces along this process. But I think a lot of like being devoted to truth within yourself and honoring that, and honesty with your partner will go a really long way. And through all of it, just be so tender with your heart. Like, our hearts are really they're like, a lot of our pain that comes up in relationships, it goes so much more smoothly if we're willing to like run up and hold our own hearts within it, and just like be there with ourselves and the innocence and the pain, and really do our best to show up for it, the parts of us that are asking for a lot of attention and TLC, basically. That was a long answer, but
it's so wonderful, because I think, it's been admittedly a little while for me. I mean, for context, I'm married, so it's not. I'm not in that place where it's new love, and so there's a different set of things that come up
for sure.
After the Disney movie,
right?
I'm just kidding. For some reason, this keeps making me laugh today, but I think there is something that's really, in thinking about past breakups, and knowing when a relationship didn't feel right, and it could be either that you find yourself just angry or really frustrated, and like that's, at the time it was very difficult, but it's an invitation to say, okay, but why? Because this is showing up for a reason. Is it because I have this expectation of what a family member said I should do or should want, and maybe that doesn't align for me? Or is it just this person maybe isn't meeting me in a way that is right for me? So it's really, breakups are horrible, and also you learn a lot.
Totally. And I think that's the thing, is I was just talking to a client about this the other day, that there's two pieces that you just mentioned. One is, so often our fear of failure, or our fear of loss or the unknown, can keep us in relationships much longer than what's healthy, or stay in one that's clearly not aligned for partnership or marriage, things like that. And so sometimes that fear of loss can keep us just like holding on super, super tight. And often in a lot of my work, it's going back to that sense of like truth and feeling mad. It's a lot around like alignment, and who I am, who you are, what we want in the world, how we meet each other or not. Like, is that aligned for life partnership? And maybe it is for a certain point. And then so often if it starts to shift and things are really changing, and it's really not sustainable anymore and not a good fit, if we hold on super, super tight for a long time, it does actually start to tarnish the connection and love. And so often if we can recognize that, and again, it's not just like a quick decision, it's like a really deep process. But if you get to that point, you can restructure how you relate to that person as a friend or whatever. And it can actually, you can maintain connection and care. But so often if we stay in it for way, 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 way longer than is healthy for either person, it just starts to bring you both down, and it can start to really tarnish the connection. And so, I mean, there's so many reasons why we stay in relationships longer than are good for us. And there's so many layers to it, of course, and there's a lot of pieces. But I think if we can start to grow like, I mean, courage is definitely part of it, but this returns back to that self-love piece of just like, oof, I know, like, I got me. I know, even if it's intense and hard and scary, if this is what's really true and needed in a way that really honors and doesn't abandon my own heart and my needs, that I'll be able to navigate all the changes and transitions and the grief. Like I have resiliency. I will get through that. And if we hold that, it really changes how we show up for different relationship processes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's also really hard.
It's really hard. Yeah, way easier said than done. Like it's deep, hard stuff. And that's why I'm such an advocate for support during these time periods, because there's so much that comes up. And like we were saying before we started recording, just like breakups do just crack your heart open, like heartbreak. It's intense, but it does open you, and there's a lot of richness there, but it's intense.
Well, and what do you see people I don't know, maybe on the other side of it, are there some stories or thoughts that you have, if somebody's like in that really delicate space of, I don't know if this is right? Because I think that's the really hard thing about this season too, is there's the pressure and it's supposed to be right. But what if it's not? And I don't, are there some stories you have of the other side where somebody's made the powerful decision to be like, yeah, this isn't it, and I'm choosing me for now? Like, what happens? I don't know if you have any.
Yeah. I love that. So, and this reminds me of a client that I worked with, and it was a really kind of speaking to that process of like in the relationship, some things are really off. How do I show up for it? And then going from there. And we really worked a lot on helping her get clear on what was off for her, and her, the needs of hers that weren't being met, and just these core things, and got really, really clear on that, and helped her have those conversations with her partner, and a lot of, gave it her 100% all that she could control and bring, and that's part of it. You can't control how your partner reacts or responds or shows up, but she just gave it her all. And through that process, it was a really interesting experience for her to see where she had neglected a lot of her own needs and joy for the relationship. And so through the process, she did get clear, like, okay, this is time for me to like transition out of this relationship. And through that process, just she reconnected so much to her own like sense of self and like authority in her life and what she really wanted. And for her, the relationship, she had gotten, a certain way in which it was, she had just taken on a lot that really wasn't hers. And so it was this powerful, I really love this word reclamation. And I feel like it's a really like, powerful thing that happens for many of us in a breakup. And we start to gather and reclaim parts of ourselves. And so soon after, she just really experienced this like, intense feeling and waves of grief and processing what happened there. And at the same time, it's like both can be there. She was having that and just like big openings and joy and like rich friendships and feeling alive in a certain way that she hadn't. And through that process, within all of that, her getting really clear on what she wanted. And then at the very end of we worked together for a while, and towards the end had an old friend that was kind of there the whole time, that like they had a powerful connection, and she just, you know, wasn't ready for it or aware of it, and just timing and all the inner work she had done. And they're in like a really beautiful, like prosperous, like rich relationship now. So that story, and I've had my own personal versions of that. And I think that's part of why this has become my work, is the breakups have become really powerful catalysts for healing and delight and like rebirth and all of it. And so it's really can be, breakups, like we said, are freaking hard and intense. And I think we so often forget, especially when we're in the midst of the transition and all the big feelings, that on the other side of it is also like a lot of goodness and delight and rediscovering joy and play and parts of yourself. So it's,
that's so interesting. I don't know if you heard me kind of squeal there for a second, because I was like, this little bit of, and it's not little, it's like the biggest thing, but is that dance between the fear and love, basically, I would guess, and that's the powerful catalyst, and why this show is around, is like, what's that dance between ultimate awful mourning and grief, and then the ability to find and feel joy on the other side of it. But the hardest thing ever is that it's that transformation of, you have to be able to be courageous enough to say, yes, I don't want to do whatever this is. And sometimes you don't even have a choice. Like, you know, if somebody's facing an accident or something else, like sometimes you don't even have a choice to go through that life event. But when you do, and on the other side, the healing and the whole thing, everything that opens up after that is just, it's breathtaking. And I think our fear will hold us back every time. So I almost started crying. That's what that squeal was. I was like, same thing. Oh my gosh. So
yes, it's exquisite, really. And often I've found in my own experience and with my clients too, but I can speak to my own really strongly, of going through grief and really being in a space in my own life where I've been able to not resist it as much and show up for it and really let it just like, crack my heart open. I've been so aware of like that process is like the grief and the love are so often of the same, they're like threaded together. They're of the same, you know, it's like that grief opens you up to how much love and care there is and was. And it's just this powerful process of how they're together. And I think the fear and the joy are so threaded also. And I think something I use with my clients a lot who are moving through that fear and that threshold of leaving, you know, the safety net, even if it was dysfunctional and painful, it was familiar, perhaps, that relationship. And it can be very intense to walk forward, and even with the fear. And something that can be helpful is really reminding yourself of what you're saying yes to by saying no to the relationship. And that can be a guiding force to keep you centered and just like, not like eyes on the prize, but you know, just like with your vision clear of what you're going through, so that you can meet the hard stuff and know it doesn't mean something's wrong or bad. It's just, it'll keep you on track.
Yeah, that's also very powerful. And I know one of my terrible breakups, I had actually been engaged to a person that it turned out, off record, we can talk all about it. It's just so the relationship was just not a fit for so many reasons. And I think, I mean, full transparency, I had said yes to the engagement and then realized this is like the worst thing I could have ever said yes to. And then there's a whole thing that, so I'm sure you kind of understand that, but then the pressure was on and I was like, but this is the worst. And so after that played itself out rather dramatically, I told myself, you know, you're on timeout. Like I put myself, and this is way before I ever did any coaching or anything. But literally for like a year, I was like, one, you are not dating anyone. You're being sent to your room basically here. Go think about what you've done. And with love. And I said, you got to just decide, like, are you doing these things out of love or out of fear? Like, it was that. And it's become a very powerful practice for many things, like really kind of catching myself in a gap moment about anything, not just relationships or interpersonal anything, but like, am I making this decision because it's resonating and it feels aligned and it's lighting me up? And it's not one of those hell yeah things, really. It's just like, is this right? Or am I doing it for some fear-based reason, which could be fear of missing out. It could be fear of somebody thinks I look stupid. It could be I fear I look stupid. Like, so that was really,
so many things.
A really big learning. Here we are sharing about my own love life. But
I love you're lovingly set yourself to time out
for a year.
Oh God, for a year. Oh God, that's
off
so
the
classic.
Market.
Yeah, off the market.
Go back to your room, Jenkins. Anyway, so
I get that. It's, and I think so often in the work I do, it comes up a lot of women. Well, I work a lot with women, and it's a very common thing, and for a lot of humans, around staying in some of the women I work with, let me just start over, have this knowingness, like kind of like you're saying, of like, this is not a good fit, but there's the fear of being alone. There's the fear that maybe there's nothing else out there for me. Maybe this is as good as it can get. I should just kind of stay in it. So there can be so many fears, even with the knowing. And so it can take a lot of inquiry and courage. And I mean, it takes guts.
It really does.
I swear.
Yeah. Well, and I say all that lightheartedly now about sending myself to my room, my relationship room, or whatever we want to call that. But like, that makes no sense. But like, it was heartbreaking. Like that was not a good time. And so, I mean, I guess I'm asking myself, I'm like having my own conversation over here, but I think if I had words to say to that person who was walking into that, it would have been like, hey, trust your intuition. You know what's going on, and you can choose to say no to this now instead of having to watch it all play out in front of you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a huge part of the post-breakup process, and I work with a lot of my clients on, is like rebuilding self-trust.
Yeah.
Especially if there was elements within the relationship that made it challenging to do that. But it's such a huge thing of like trusting yourself again.
Yes. I almost feel like but you don't. What happened there? But yeah, there was a lot of not trusting myself.
Tapped in. Yeah.
Yes. You're at the top of
you're feeling very exposed. Yeah.
That's so funny. I'm sorry. And if this person's listening, I have a lot to say about them. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, tune into the next episode.
Right. It's the tell-all episode. I'm just kidding. That would be so funny if I went on a roast. Sorry. I'll edit most of this out. I'm truly enjoying our conversation. Podcast.
In this episode, Paula digs into her ex.
It's the best story you've ever heard. But
oh God.
Whew.
Good.
Okay, I'm back with the class here.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, and I think really learning to trust yourself is it's the hardest thing, and it's like the key to then being able to go into the next thing, if there is, or really being content and happy with being single for a while, because that's also a really beautiful place to be.
Yeah, and that is such a foundational part to like really fortify your relationship with yourself and your sense of trust and your awareness when you have all this like sovereignty and space just to really feel your own body signals and knowing without any other like input in a particular like romantic way. And just on a personal note, that was a huge part of my journey, was in a relationship that for me, it was a very, there was a lot of like manipulation and gaslighting that happened in this past relationship, which really eroded my sense of trust, because I so often took on their perspective and was in so many situations that inherently, and for him purposely, made me question my own perspective and experience. And so it was such a huge part of my journey to recognize my own signals and what basically what was mine, what wasn't, and what I knew I needed and what I didn't. So all that to say, it just rebuilding self-trust is just been a big part of my journey, and I help a lot of my clients through that in the breakup process. It's huge.
Yeah. Definitely powerful. I'm thinking another thing here that we could dive into is, I mean, it's kind of hard from our perspective right now to know what February will be like, but this whole year, what fun. But like, as we're looking at this, I'm sure, or maybe I should ask this as a question, have you seen people that, I'm trying to think of the actual question. How have you seen, or have you worked with people where COVID and shelter in place and the stress of all of this has taken a toll? So have you seen, how have you seen that playing out for people and relationships?
In so many ways. I feel like the relationships have just been like hit hard with COVID, and in so many different like sides of the spectrum. Like a lot of I know people who are in relationships who went from, you know, having your whole world open up to suddenly both people working from home and being quarantined together and so much time together. Even if there weren't too many big challenges in the relationship, it's like, I mean, talk about a pressure cooker of a year. And so all that time together and lack of other community and connections. And so that I've seen been like very challenging on that side of it for folks who are in relationship during COVID. And actually even a lot of interesting things coming up around like different perspectives around COVID and what's safe and what's not. And that can be such a tricky thing. Even if it's slightly off, it tends to like heighten our, you know, like our sense of safety, and can feel very threatening, and different needs and subtleties. And maybe, you know, one person is way more extroverted and they are really suffering, and one's more introverted. And you know, there's just like so many different parts of your partner that are like very present and intensified through COVID and quarantining and so much stay-at-home time, and just navigating the stress of what's happening in the world and how we process that, and all of it. So that's one piece of it. And then it's also been a really, on the other side of the spectrum, a really isolating, tricky time to be single and or going through a breakup. And it's, you know, I mean, on terms of going through a breakup, it can feel extra scary to feel, you know, it can be so helpful to have your community and times with your besties and travel, or like that sense on the other side of a breakup. And so to feel that not as accessible, that sense of being alone and isolation can feel really challenging. And I know for some of my clients who have gone through a breakup this year, it has made it more challenging to keep their boundaries with their ex. It's been a lot harder for them to not send that text or kind of backslide a little, because they're feeling a lot of, you know, loneliness and isolation and lack of connection. And so it's taken a lot of, really looking at that and getting creative and being in choice, you know, like we need to include the context of life we're in and make choices from there. But it's tricky on that front. And then obviously tricky if, you know, you're at the phase where you're single or maybe wanting to date. Obviously it's a really tricky time to feel possibility and meeting new people. And there's a lot of communication that's heightened. Dating someone right now, it's like, and normally for a lot of people, when you're like dating someone new early on, you may not be having a lot of conversations yet of like, you know, what are it's like COVID has kind of become like the worst STD ever, because you have to like have these conversations with people early on just to like hang out with them without masks, you know, and have these really intense safety conversations. Like, who have you been around? Are you dating anyone else? Are you kissing anyone else? Right. What, like, all that stuff, which is kind of these certain sort of body-based safety conversations that you would have, you know, commonly with like an STD conversation when you were like further along, or you wanting to be exclusive, or things like that. So it's an interesting like accelerator on that front, where you're communicating and these big things like very early on.
Yeah. Well, and it does put a really interesting layer on the safety question. Yeah, that is fascinating. I had not even really thought about it from that perspective. Yeah, I mean, I know some people who are single and looking, and my experience with one of those friends is it's heartbreaking in a different way, because you know she really wants to find connection and she really wants to find someone, but then kind of exactly what you're saying is even getting beyond the online connection of like, okay, like it seems like we have something in common here.
Yeah.
You know, at one of her, I love this idea that she came up with. She's like, so we went and we sat 6 feet apart on the beach and had a conversation. And I'm like, that's amazing. And she's like, well, you know, I had to meet him. And
yeah,
I think it's so hard because then you're right. There's a whole different layer of, okay, are we going to even get literally closer?
Yeah, like can we hug? Like, what does that look like? Or, you know, there's a lot of communication that I think, and you know, is thrusting a lot of us into getting more comfortable. And you know, if communication and owning your needs and your perspectives has been a challenge for you, I think the COVID thing has really forced a lot of us into having those conversations, and building those communication muscles, and sharing what you're comfortable with, in a way where in your past, maybe you could have gotten away with not really taking a stand for what you needed or wanted. So yeah, COVID has definitely impacted the relational front. That's for sure. Big time.
Well, and my experience is more of the, you know, longer relationship, kid in the house, like it's
nonstop.
Yeah, it is. And discovering I'm much more of an introvert than anyone ever would have guessed. So yeah, it's just been really interesting. And I think you're right, though. It does, even on any level of wherever you are on the spectrum of in relationship or looking for a relationship, it does push all of the boundaries of communication, because then when we're always in the same space together, it's like, hey, I need you to stay out of the kitchen. I'm going to be doing this. Like, it's even just like spatially, how do we the home up so we're not like on top of each other?
So, yeah, it really has. Yeah, it's been such a huge communication school of sorts.
It's a good word for it.
Yes. Mastery school of communication, also known as COVID.
Is there anything else that you feel like you'd like to add about relationships and Valentine's Day and those things into this space?
I think the big thing that's coming up that has been sprinkled throughout our conversation, but it really is around that self-love piece and having a really loving relationship with yourself, and even jokingly about your time out, like doing that with a lot of love and care and like tenderness. And I think that's really huge to keep in mind, whether you're in a relationship or going through a breakup or single, like having this really loving relationship with yourself. And in a way, when I say self-love, it's not just like doing a facial at night and feeling good about yourself when you're having a nice day. It's like the breadth of love and care, the part that greets all parts of yourselves, when the parts of you that feel the ugliest and darkest and broken. It's like cultivating this sort of relationship with yourself that you really show up for all parts of yourself. And that's obviously very present in a breakup, but it's essential to have that, to have a healthy relationship. And so I would say, like, no matter where you're at in the Valentine's Day season and what's coming up for you, just the foundation is to be really sweet and tender with yourself in the challenges and the confusion and the places that hurt, that's really essential, and being harsh and critical towards ourselves really only create more like gridlock, and softening things and being like gentle with ourselves. It could create that little space to get in there and shift and heal, and it just feels better. It
really
works
does.
and it just feels better.
Yeah, even my tough love with myself felt better than the other pieces. So yeah, thank you for that. If somebody is, they love what they hear and they want to connect with you, where can people find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram. My handle's at _ honey in the heart. So that's a great place to connect and build community there. And then my website's kenzieeason.com. So that's a great place to plug in. And I have a free masterclass there, 60 minutes, just like all filled with content of how to take your breakup from tragic to transformative. And there's a lot of good wisdom nuggets in there, and places to start. And yeah, so cool. That's where to go.
I'll drop all that in the show notes, of course. And, then the last question I love to ask everyone is, what are 3 ways that you can think of to jumpstart joy in your world? No, in your life, in the world, or in other people's lives?
Ooh, three ways
to jumpstart joy.
To jumpstart joy. The first one is dancing. I'm a huge fan of that, and especially, cultivate so much joy, but I actually suggest it a lot during a breakup, because it's just such a good way to process grief and move through and get your groove back. There's just so much goodness there. So I'd say dancing. And 2 other ways to jumpstart joy. I get a lot of joy out of finding whatever little, especially around like food and drink, that just make me just so delighted. For me, it's my special coffee in the morning, and it just like fills my heart. And yeah, it's such a simple thing that starts to overflow for me. And maybe the third one is just to bookend it with peeing outside.
It's the best. Oh, I love it so much.
Yeah, to find a private place and just give it a try.
Go with nature. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Mackenzie, for being on. It's such a treat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yay.